Hi, this is Georgia West, also known as the Genealogy Queen, and I am here today to give you a sneak peek on what's coming up in the 1950 census release. So here we go, right? So I'll try to put stuff up as we're going so you can see what's going on. But first, I'm going to give you an idea and take a look at this is what the 1950 census population and housing schedules looked like, right? And all the different information that's on it. So we have the name of the street, the house, the apartment number. Was it a house, a farm, or a ranch? If no, then is it on more than 3 acres of property? If yes, then there's additional questions in a questionnaire that you can refer to. Of course, your last name, first name, middle initial, relationship to household, race, sex, etc. How old you were on your last birthday, your marital status. This one is defined by marriage, widowed, divorce, separated, or never married, single, and then never married. And then place of birth, if it was what state you were born in, or if it was a foreign country outside the United States, then what territory were you in? And so hopefully it'll be more than just like Germany, the country. In some cases, depending on the enumerator, it might have like, say, Bavaria, right? So it will give more examples. If foreign born, if you were naturalized or not. In this case, when you say no, it also means even if the first papers were filed with the intent, that's still a no on the 1950 census. So keep that in mind. Or if you're American parent, if you were born to American parents abroad or at sea. So that's also a distinction that's new there. If you were over age 14, then you were asked another series of questions. What this person was doing most of the week, whether at school, work, at home, etc. If they worked outside the home, if no, then were you looking for work? Were you temporarily laid off? How many hours did you work in the past week? Your occupation, kind of business or industry. And then it gave a class of worker. So it's going to say if you worked privately for the government, if you owned the business, if you worked without pay, right? So volunteer work. And then in the 1950 census, what they did was they said, we want to take a sample. We don't want to do this for everyone, but we're going to take a sample. So every 5th person, there's like a little extra circle or line on the number, and they're going to ask those people additional questions. And so those additional sample questions were you living in the same house or farm 1 year ago? So in the 1940 census, they asked that question about 5 years ago in 1935. In this case, they're asking about it in 1949. They realized that after World War II, there was lots of movement and lots of people going back and forth, moving across country, going to various places. And so anyway, they wanted to ask what was 1 year ago. Country father and mother were born in, the highest grade of school attended, and did you finish that grade? Have you attended school since February 1st of 1950? Weeks looking for work. How many weeks did you work last year? This gets very detailed. So in the 1950 census, they ask, what was the amount of money that you received or earned in 1949, the year before? Was it by an employer, self-employed, and or non-earnings like rents, interest, dividends, etc.? And so they're really asking, how much did you make last year? And then break it down for us and how that income came to you. So wow, right? Very intrusive, but just great information for us to really get a feel on how our families were living, what was going on. Then, did you ever serve in the U.S. Armed Forces, World War II, World War I, or other? And if it has other, it should name what it is. So great information to know whether they served in the military and whether there's military records to be researching. Has the person been married more than once? Also really great if you had a divorce or a widow and were remarried. It'll say how many years since married, widow, divorced, or separated. If female and ever married, how many children were born to you? It does not count stillbirths, but births. So that is like the population schedule, right? So lots of great information there. It does not ask whether the house was owned or rented or the value or the year of school completed, unless you were one of those people that had the extra questions, sample questions to be answered. And then there also is the housing questionnaire. And I really encourage people, once this is indexed and once you have access to this part of the census, don't ignore it. There's lots of extra information on this housing questionnaire. So it's going to give whether it was a house, apartment, flat, trailer, tent, boat, railroad car, hotel, institution. Like, it really defines exactly how they were living. It also gives lots of information about the utilities. They were very they were very interested in knowing what kind of conditions you were living in post World War II. And so they wanted to know the water supply, how it was coming in. Was it being pumped from outside? Was it plumbing that came to the inside? Various questions there. Type of toilet, bathtub, shower, kitchen sink, cooking fuel. Were you coal? Were you natural gas? Were you wood burning stove? How was your cooking fuel being utilized? Where was that coming from? So again, lots of really great questions that kind of paint this picture, right, to understand the living conditions of our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, etc. In the 1950s. So, and in addition to that, I just wanted to share real quick that there are some additional people added to the 1950 census that weren't previously. People who lived in the residence of the state of Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico. Other U.S. territories were also included in the 1950 census, and transients. They made a great effort to work with people who were homeless or on the move, in the process, living in hotel rooms, temporary stays, transient people. They wanted to make sure that everyone was included in the 1950 census. And so we get, again, this really great opportunity to see where was our ancestor at this moment in time. And so I just find that really great. So that's kind of step one, just giving you this overview on what's on the 1950 census in the population schedule and in the housing schedule. So step two, we'll go on, is looking at your family tree and making a list of who you want to research for first. And then looking for your 1950 family addresses. So if you can pinpoint where they were living, if they were still living in the same place as 1940, well, then that's easy. You can look at the 1940 census and you can pull up that address, write it down, have it on hand, right? If you're not sure if they were one of the many families that moved, got married, did all of that with the big baby boom, you might say, well, I'm not sure where they lived. I think they lived, in this state, or they lived in this county. I'm not sure. As close as you can get it would be the best, right? And so I say, if you want to try to find your ancestors before the indexes are finished, we really need to pin down a pretty good address, right? So you're not browsing through thousands of images. So the more that we can get this narrowed down, the better. So I suggest looking at city directories, looking at vital records, looking at land records. If you know a county or a state or an area or a region, that you can look up land records and try to locate their address. Newspapers, obituaries of family, letters, diaries, relatives. I had an interesting one because I thought I knew where both of my parents lived in 1950. And I know where my dad was at, and I assumed my mom. And so I called her just to kind of verify, and she goes, well, that depends on when in 1950 they took the census, because she was very young. She was a tiny little girl. And I said, well, wait a minute, you've always lived in this town that I grew up in. And she's like, well, no, that's not true. I lived in the neighboring town and we moved in 1950. And I was like, who knew, right? So she did. So anyways, so she was able to give me a location and a street, not necessarily a house number, but a street of where she lived at the beginning of 1950. And again, she wasn't sure when she moved because she was very, very little. And then I knew where the address was of where she had moved to. So now I have both addresses, right, that I can look up. So as much as you can narrow down, that would be my encouragement, right? So, and then the next video, I'm going to show you how to look up by location, find your enumeration district, know exactly where to look, and we'll go from there. So stay tuned for part 2.